My father handed me the folded flag 30 minutes before the veterans' memorial dedication and told me not to touch the microphone. Then he gave me the program. My name had vanished from the keynote line. A white correction label covered it. My brother Luke's name was printed on top. Luke had never served a day in uniform. I had served 8 years. I had also written the grant that paid for the memorial, gathered the names carved into its stone, and spent 3 years getting it built. Dad looked at the label and said, "Today is bigger than your feelings, Harper. Carry the flag, smile for the pictures, and let your brother speak." He did not know one thing. I had already seen what was under that white strip. I was 36 years old and a former Army logistics officer. I was also very good at keeping copies. In the blue folder under my chair, I had the committee minutes, the approved program, the grant application, and an email my father believed had disappeared. He thought I had come to the ceremony to obey him one last time. I had come to decide whether the memorial would open with the truth or with the same family lie I had carried since childhood. Before I take you back, tell me in the comments whether someone in your family has ever used your work while hiding your name. And subscribe if you believe silence should never be mistaken for agreement. I grew up outside Dayton, Ohio, in a brick ranch house where military service was treated like both a religion and a family business. My father was Frank Cole. He kept his Army medals in a glass case above the fireplace. Every Memorial Day, he polished the glass and put on a navy blazer. Then he drove us to the county courthouse. He would stand in front of the old bronze plaque and tell Luke and me that a person's name was the only part of them that could outlive fear. Dad had served during the Gulf War. He rarely described what he had seen, but he talked often about what service had made him. It had given him discipline, purpose, and a place in town where people listened when he spoke. At the hardware store, men called him Sergeant. He had been out for years. At church dinners, someone always asked him to lead the prayer. The prayer was for deployed troops. Dad never chased attention in an obvious way. He built a life where attention always arrived. Then it stood respectfully in front of him. My mother, Susan, understood that system and protected it. She ironed Dad's blazer before every ceremony. She kept newspaper clippings of his speeches in a cedar box. When Luke won a school award, she added his picture to the same box. When I brought home a perfect report card, she put it on the refrigerator. The grocery list soon covered it. Nobody announced that Luke mattered more. Our family was too polite for that. They showed it in where they saved the evidence. Luke was 3 years younger than me. He had the kind of face people trusted before he spoke. He was warm and funny. He could make a crowded room feel like a kitchen table. Dad called that leadership. I called it Luke being Luke. I loved him when we were children. I also learned early that if we completed the same chore, Dad praised Luke for initiative and praised me for being dependable. Initiative opened doors. Dependable people held them. I was 17 when Luke shared his plan. He told Dad he would enlist after high school. Dad threw him a backyard party. Luke had not even spoken to a recruiter. There was a cake shaped like a flag. Dad gave him the compass he had carried overseas. Luke changed his mind 6 months later. He wanted to stay near home. He wanted to join the fire department and build a life he could see. Dad said he understood. The compass remained on Luke's dresser. 2 years later, I joined the Army through a college program. I had not done it to compete with my brother. I wanted structure and work that mattered. I also wanted a chance to change. I wanted to stop needing permission to take up space. Still, part of me expected a different look from Dad. I wanted the look he had given Luke beside that flag cake. Instead, he stared at my paperwork and asked, "Are you sure you know what you're getting into?" I said I did. Dad rubbed his thumb over the edge of the kitchen table. "This is different for you," he said. I asked what that meant. He answered with one sentence. It would change shape over the next 15 years. "I just don't want you proving something at the expense of your life." It sounded like concern. Maybe part of it was, but concern became his favorite word. He used it whenever my courage made him uncomfortable. I completed training. Then I earned my commission and became a logistics officer. My job was not glamorous. I moved equipment, tracked fuel, found missing parts, and made sure people had what they needed before they reached a place where need became danger. I loved the clarity of it. A convoy could not run on charm. A manifest did not care whose son you were. Either the numbers matched reality or someone paid for the lie. Dad attended my commissioning ceremony. He shook my hand and said, "Good work." Luke brought flowers. He yelled louder than anyone when my name was called. Mom cried into a tissue. For one afternoon, I believed our family had adjusted. Then the local paper printed a photograph of Dad pinning my bars. He clipped it carefully. But when I visited home months later, the clipping was not in the cedar box. It was folded inside a kitchen drawer beneath expired coupons. I served for 8 years and deployed once to Afghanistan. I will not pretend I was fearless. I was afraid more often than I admitted, especially on nights when the radios would not stop and every request sounded urgent. I learned to act while afraid. I learned that leadership was not standing where people could see you. It was being accountable for what happened after they stopped looking. During my deployment, a young mechanic from our support unit died when a roadside blast struck a vehicle near ours. Her name was Sergeant Alina Ruiz. She was 27 and quick with a wrench. She was also incapable of drinking coffee without making a face. I did not know her family well. I knew the empty place she left in our morning briefings. Years later, that absence would become the reason I refused to let my father turn a memorial into a family advertisement. I left active service at 30 and returned to Dayton. There was no dramatic collapse. I was tired of moving every few years. I wanted work that could build something lasting. I became an operations manager for a food distribution company. The job was ordinary in the best way. Trucks arrived. Warehouses opened. Problems had names, deadlines, and solutions. I rented a small house near a bike trail. There I began learning who I was without a uniform. Dad seemed relieved that I was home. He invited me to breakfast at the same diner every other Saturday. We talked about supply chains and city taxes. We also discussed Luke's progress in the fire department. We did not talk about Afghanistan. When strangers asked about his children, Dad said, "My son is a firefighter. My daughter works in distribution." He was not lying. He was arranging the truth in the order that felt safest to him. The old courthouse plaque had bothered me since childhood. It listed local men who died in wars. Then it praised the sons of our county. By the time I came home, the bronze had darkened, several names were misspelled, and there was no room for later conflicts. One winter morning, I found a small paper flag tucked beneath it. Rain had turned the ink blue. Someone had written a woman's name on the white stripe. The official plaque did not include her. I took a picture and sent it to Dad. He called within 5 minutes. "We have talked about replacing that thing for years," he said. I asked who we meant. He told me the Veterans Committee had discussed a memorial park near the courthouse, but nobody could manage the grant work. Then he added, almost casually, "You're good with paperwork." That should have warned me. Instead, I heard an invitation. Dad had never asked for my military experience before. Now he wanted me at the table. I imagined us building something together. It would be larger than the old pattern between us. I imagined Alina's name carved correctly. I imagined a girl standing there one day. She would see that service had never belonged to one kind of person. The first committee meeting took place at the local Veterans Hall. We used the back room. There were 6 folding chairs, a coffee urn, and a wall covered with framed unit photographs. Dad sat at the head of the table. Denise Carter, a Navy veteran and retired school principal, kept the minutes. 2 business owners handled donations. A city planner advised us on permits. Luke arrived late with a box of donuts. He received the warmest welcome in the room. Dad introduced me as his daughter and our numbers person. Then he introduced Luke as the project's community voice. I waited for him to mention that I was also a veteran. He did not. Denise looked at me across the table. She asked what branch I had served in. When I answered, the room changed. The city planner straightened. One donor asked about my rank. Dad smiled, but his jaw tightened whenever someone discovered a fact he had not chosen to present. The project needed a site plan, a list of eligible names, and private donations. It also needed a state heritage grant. The application was the missing piece. I volunteered to coordinate it. Luke offered to create a website and speak at fundraising events. Dad approved both roles. For the first few months, the division made sense. I worked at night verifying service records. Luke filmed short interviews. Dad visited businesses and asked for checks. We were useful in different ways. Then usefulness began turning into ownership. At a spring fundraiser, Luke showed a polished video about 3 generations of Cole men serving their community. The first generation was Dad in uniform. The second was Luke in his fire department jacket. The third was a group of boys placing flags beside graves. I was sitting 10 feet from the screen. My name appeared once in small letters under research support. After the event, I asked Luke why he had used that title. He looked honestly confused. Dad wrote it, he said. He wanted a clean theme. I asked whether my service made the theme messy. Luke winced. You know how he is with public stuff. I told him that was not an answer. He promised to revise the website. The next morning, the title was gone, but the video remained online. I confronted Dad at breakfast. He stirred sugar into his coffee until the spoon struck the mug in a steady rhythm. Fundraising is storytelling, he said. People give when they understand the picture. I asked where I fit in the picture. He said, "You fit in the work, Harper. That matters more than applause." It was a clever sentence because it made my objection sound vain, and I left the diner wondering whether I had confused visibility with ego. That was my first mistake. I accepted his definition of humility because it resembled a value I respected. In the Army, I had learned not to chase credit, but there is a difference between refusing praise and allowing someone else to use your record. One is discipline. The other is permission. I did not understand that clearly enough yet, so I returned to the work. The state grant application was due in early fall. It required a veteran project coordinator. It also required a personal statement about the memorial's public value. Dad asked me to take both. I wrote about the paper flag beneath the courthouse plaque. I wrote about Alina Ruiz. I wrote about the silence left by names communities forget to record, and I wrote that a memorial should not create a polished family story. It should preserve the truth of who served. The application requested $180,000. Our local donations would cover the rest. I built the budget and attached the service records. Then I signed as Veteran Project Coordinator. Dad signed as Board Chair. Before we mailed it, he read my statement in the committee room. For a few seconds, his face softened. "This is good," he said. For the first time, I heard pride in his voice. I did not have to search for it. The grant was approved 4 months later. Dad called me at work and shouted with joy. My assistant heard him through the phone. That evening, the committee met at the courthouse steps. Luke streamed the announcement. Dad thanked the state foundation and local donors. He also thanked my son, who gave this project a public heartbeat. Then he thanked the committee as a group. He did not say my name. Denise found me afterward near the old plaque. "You wrote the application," she said. I told her the project mattered more than credit. She studied me for a moment. "That can be true," she said, "and it can still be true that somebody is training you to disappear." I wanted to reject the word disappear. It felt dramatic. Then I looked at the paper flag and the photograph on my phone and realized a missing name never begins as a blank space. It begins with someone deciding the space is acceptable. Construction started the following spring. The memorial would be a curved limestone wall facing a small plaza. Names would be grouped by conflict. A separate panel would honor all local veterans who served. The center would hold a simple bronze compass, not a statue. I suggested the compass because service had sent people in many directions, and home was not always the place they started. Dad loved the compass idea. He told donors it represented the values he had taught Luke and me. Luke designed the campaign logo around it. I did not object. A symbol can belong to more than one person. Dad's language kept bothering me. He turned shared work into inherited character. He spoke as if every useful thing we did had begun inside him. My nights filled with details. I confirmed spellings with families. I compared military records with newspaper archives. I found 11 errors on the old plaque, including one man listed under the wrong war and 2 women omitted entirely. One of those women was still alive. She lived 20 minutes away. She assumed the town did not consider her service worth recording. Her name was June Parker. She had served as an Army nurse decades earlier. When I visited, she brought out a photograph of herself in uniform. She placed it on the table with both hands. "My father told people I worked at a hospital," she said. "He never said where." I knew that sentence too well. I promised her the new wall would spell her name correctly. That promise became more important to me than any family approval. Luke did real work too. He organized volunteer days and convinced the fire department to donate labor. He also helped raise money. That mattered. I never wanted to erase him in return. The problem was not that Luke had a role. The problem was that Dad kept enlarging Luke's role until it covered mine. By the second year, local articles called Luke the memorial's founder. He never corrected them. I asked him about it in the fire station parking lot. Luke leaned against his truck and looked exhausted. "I didn't write the articles," he said. I told him he had shared everyone. He stared at the pavement. "Dad says the project needs one public face." I asked why that face had to be his. Luke answered quietly, "Because he knows what to do with me." That sentence stayed with me. Luke was not innocent, but he was not confused about our father. Dad knew how to be proud of Luke. His son served the town without entering the military. He could place Luke inside the family legend. The shape never had to change. My service required a different story. I had done the thing Dad once reserved for men, and I had done it without becoming the version of a soldier he recognized in himself. For a while, I thought understanding Dad's discomfort would make it hurt less. It did not. Insight can explain a wound without closing it. Still, I kept going. The wall rose. The bronze compass arrived. Families began mailing photographs for the opening display. Each envelope reminded me that the memorial did not belong to the Cole family, no matter how often Dad placed us at the center of it. The committee set the dedication date. It would be the first Saturday in November. The state foundation wanted the veteran project coordinator to give the keynote because my statement had anchored the grant. Denise made the motion. Another member seconded it. The vote was unanimous, including Dad. Luke would welcome guests and introduce me. The approved minutes recorded every detail. A week later, Dad handed me the first printed program. My name appeared beneath the words keynote address. I ran my thumb over the ink. It was a small thing, black letters on cream paper, but it felt like a public promise. Dad watched me and said, "You earned that spot." I almost laughed from relief. Instead, I thanked him. That was the last uncomplicated conversation we had. I wrote the speech over several weeks. I kept it simple. I would talk about June Parker, the paper flag, and Alina Ruiz. I would thank the families who trusted us with names. I would say that remembrance fails whenever comfort becomes more important than accuracy. I did not mention my childhood. I did not mention Dad's omissions. The speech was about the memorial, not revenge. Then a regional television station called Luke. They wanted a feature before the dedication. Their producer had seen his fundraising videos and liked the father and son angle. Luke invited Dad to the interview. Nobody told me until Mom posted a picture from the studio. Dad wore his navy blazer. Luke wore his fire department uniform. A model of the memorial sat between them. Its bronze compass shone under the lights. The segment aired that evening. Dad said the memorial had begun as a promise between a veteran father and the son who carried his values into public service. Luke said the project was our family's way of giving back. The reporter asked whether anyone else had led the research. Dad answered, "We had a wonderful committee behind us." My name never appeared. I called Dad before the segment ended. He let the phone ring twice. Then he answered in a whisper because he was still at the station. I asked why he had erased me. The project was funded through my veteran statement. He said I was overreacting to a 5-minute feature. I told him the dedication speech would correct the record. It would not attack anyone. His voice changed. "That is exactly what I was afraid of," he said. I asked what he thought I planned to say. "You always turn things into a lesson about who gets overlooked," he replied. I reminded him that the memorial existed because people had been overlooked. He said donors did not want controversy on opening day. I said my speech contained no controversy. Dad answered, "With you, the implication is the controversy." That was the moment the conflict became clear. Dad was not afraid I would embarrass the family by lying. He was afraid I would tell the truth in a way he could not control, because my presence at the microphone would force people to see that the family story on television had been incomplete. He wanted the memorial to preserve names. He only wanted that after deciding whose name could stand in the light. 2 days later, Luke came to my house with coffee. He said Dad wanted a compromise. Luke would give the keynote. I could speak for 3 minutes about the research process. I asked whether Luke had read my speech. He admitted he had not. I asked whether he wanted my place. He rubbed both hands over his face. "I want opening day to happen without Dad blowing up the family," he said. I should have said no. Instead, I made my second mistake. I agreed to shorten my speech if the printed program kept my name and identified me as Veteran Project Coordinator. I thought I was protecting the memorial from a family fight. I thought a smaller truth was better than no truth. Luke promised he would explain the agreement to Dad exactly as I had stated it. Dad sent a one-word text that night. "Fine." The word looked like acceptance. It was actually permission he believed I had given him. 3 days later, Denise called from the print shop. She sounded angry. "Did you resign as keynote?" she asked. I said no. She told me Dad had ordered a revised program naming Luke as the only speaker. My 3-minute remarks were gone. I drove to the print shop during lunch. A stack of cream programs sat beside the cutter. The printer, a man who had known Dad for years, showed me the revision order. Dad had written, "Harper agreed to ceremonial support only." Beside the keynote line, the printer had placed a white correction label over my name on the sample, then typed Luke's name above it to check spacing. I peeled one corner of the label. My name was still there underneath. The sight made my stomach turn. Erasure had become physical. Dad had not created a new program from scratch. He had covered me and printed the preferred son on top. I asked for the sample. The printer hesitated. Then he handed it over because the original order listed me as project coordinator. I placed it in my blue folder. Denise wanted to call an emergency committee meeting that night. I asked her to wait. That was not weakness. I wanted to give Dad one final chance to correct the lie privately. I drove to my parents' house and found him in the garage, polishing the bronze compass medallion that would be mounted at the center of the wall. Luke stood beside him holding a rag. I placed the labeled program on the workbench. Dad did not look surprised. I asked him to remove Luke's name and restore the approved program. I also asked him to follow the committee vote. He set down the cloth carefully. "The television station is covering the dedication," he said. "They built the segment around Luke and me. Changing speakers now makes us look disorganized." I told him the segment was already false. Dad's face hardened. "It was simplified," he said. I asked why simplification always removed me. Mom appeared in the doorway and told us to lower our voices. Luke stared at the floor. Dad tapped the program with one finger. "Your brother knows how to bring people together," he said. "You make every room account for what it did wrong." I said, "That is what accountability is." Dad answered, "That is what resentment is when it learns professional language." The sentence landed because it used my competence against me. For 1 second, I wondered whether he was right. Maybe I had carried old hunger into a public project. Maybe every missing credit felt like the kitchen drawer and the expired coupons. Then I remembered June Parker placing her photograph on the table. I remembered Elena's empty chair. I remembered the grant statement Dad had praised before it brought money. The issue was not whether I wanted applause. The memorial was built to preserve accurate names. Could it open with a deliberate falsehood? I asked Luke to tell Dad what we had agreed. Luke said I would accept a shorter role. I asked whether I had agreed to disappear. He said no. Dad turned on him. "Do not let her split hairs," he said. Luke's expression changed. "Her name is under the label," he replied. Dad looked at him as if he had broken formation. For a moment, I thought Luke might finally refuse the keynote. Instead, he said, "Can't we fix this after the ceremony?" That was Luke's habit. He wanted fairness only when fairness would cost nothing. I closed the folder. "No," I said. After the ceremony, the lie becomes the record. Dad told me I was willing to endanger 3 years of work over a line in a program, and I told him he was willing to endanger it because that line contained my name. He said the committee would stand with him. I said we would find out. Then I left the garage with the labeled program and the first clear decision I had made in months. That night, I emailed every committee member. I attached the approved minutes, the original program, the revision order, and the grant page identifying me as Veteran Project Coordinator. I did not accuse Dad of sexism or favoritism. I wrote 3 questions. Had the committee voted to replace the keynote? Had I resigned? Did the revised program accurately describe who led the veteran research and grant work? Denise replied first. No, no, no. The city planner answered next and requested an emergency meeting, while one donor called me and said Dad had told him I wanted a private role because public speaking upset me. That claim was absurd. I briefed warehouse crews every week and had spoken to rooms larger than the dedication crowd. Dad had not merely removed me. He had invented a weakness to make the removal look considerate. The emergency meeting happened the following evening. Dad arrived with Luke and a legal pad. He argued that the chair had authority over event logistics. Denise read the bylaws aloud. Program changes involving featured speakers required a majority vote, but Dad said the rule was meant for outside guests, not family adjustments. The city planner asked why family should receive less oversight than anyone else. The vote restored me as keynote and ordered a corrected program. 4 members supported it. Dad voted against. 1 donor abstained. The committee also required all media statements to identify me as Veteran Project Coordinator. It should have ended there. Instead, Dad pushed his chair back and said, "You got your public victory. I hope it is worth what you did to this family." I wanted to tell him he had done it. I wanted to list every year he had treated Luke as the safe heir to a story I had actually lived. But the committee room was not the place for all of that. I said only, "Following a vote is not a victory over you." Dad laughed once, without humor. "You always did know how to make punishment sound procedural." The print shop could not produce a full new run before the ceremony. Denise proposed a corrected insert for each program. Dad refused to distribute it. He said he would not participate in a public embarrassment. The committee voted again and gave Denise control of printed materials, while Dad remained master of ceremonies because removing him at the last minute would create another fight. I agreed. That choice would matter later. The next morning, the state foundation officer called me. She had received the committee email because the city planner copied her. She did not threaten to cancel the grant. She said the final payment depended on an accurate completion report, and the report already listed me as project coordinator. "We do not choose your speakers," she said, "but we do expect the public record to match the work we funded." I asked whether my personal statement was part of that record. She said yes. Dad had quoted it in progress reports and donor materials. The foundation had approved the project partly because a local veteran was leading the research and public interpretation. That sentence stripped away the last excuse. Dad had not believed my service was irrelevant. He had treated it as valuable when it opened a door and inconvenient when it placed me in front of the door. I printed the email and added it to the blue folder. Then I rewrote my speech one final time. I removed every sentence that sounded like a defense of myself, then added one line about accurate credit because accuracy was the moral center of the memorial. The rest remained focused on the people whose names were carved in stone. I did not want revenge. I wanted the truth to stand without needing to shout. Luke called late that night. He said Dad still intended to introduce him as keynote. I asked whether Luke intended to walk to the microphone. Silence answered first. Then he said, "I don't know." I told him he did know. He simply did not like the cost of saying it. Luke accused me of forcing him to choose between us. I said Dad had already made the choice and placed Luke on top of my name. Luke's voice broke. "He has spent my whole life telling me I carry his legacy," he said. "What am I supposed to do with that?" For the first time, I heard the burden beneath the privilege. Luke had been praised into a role he was afraid to leave. I felt compassion for him. I did not offer surrender. "Tell the truth," I said, "then decide who you are without his version." The dedication morning arrived cold and bright. The limestone wall curved around the plaza. It matched the drawings exactly. Families stood near names they had waited years to see. June Parker arrived in a red coat with her photograph tucked inside her purse. A color guard from a nearby base waited beside the courthouse. The regional television van parked near the curb. I reached the preparation room 40 minutes early. Denise was arranging corrected inserts on a table. The insert named me as keynote and veteran project coordinator. Dad entered, saw the stack, and swept it into a cardboard box. "Not today," he said. Denise stepped between him and the box. I told her I would handle it. Dad ordered Luke to take the programs outside. Luke did not move. Dad repeated his name. Luke picked up the box. Instead of carrying it away, he placed it beside Denise. That was the first visible crack in Dad's control. He looked at Luke with shock. Then he turned to me as if I had caused a machine to fail. "You could have prevented all of this," he said. I answered, "I tried. You covered my name." Dad glanced toward the open doorway where volunteers were gathering. His voice dropped. "Then give me 1 hour. Let the ceremony happen the way the station expects. We can correct the website tonight." I asked whether he would correct the television interview too. He said the segment was already done. I said that was why the live ceremony mattered. Dad walked to a chair and lifted the folded ceremonial flag. The base color guard had brought its own flags. This one was not necessary. It had been meant for a symbolic family entrance. He placed it in my arms. "Carry this behind Luke," he said. "People will see that you served. Nobody is taking that from you." The weight of the flag settled across my forearms. For a heartbeat, I was back at every ceremony where Dad had taught us to stand straight and show respect. He knew what that cloth meant to me. He was using reverence as a leash. If I refused, he could call me bitter. If I obeyed, the photographs would show a veteran silently following a civilian brother to the microphone. Then Dad handed me the revised program with the white label. "Smile for the pictures," he said. "Let Luke speak. Today is bigger than your feelings." That was the moment from the beginning. The door stood open. The crowd was taking seats. In the hallway, I could hear the low brass notes of the band warming up. I set the folded flag back on the chair. Dad reached for my wrist, then stopped before touching me. I pulled the blue folder from beneath my seat. "You're right," I said. "Today is bigger than my feelings. It is also bigger than your version of our family." I walked toward the plaza with Denise beside me and Luke several steps behind. Guests received the cream programs first. Volunteers had not added the corrected inserts. Dad had moved faster than Denise expected. I watched people open them and saw Luke's name beneath keynote address. For one terrible second, the lie looked permanent simply because it had been printed hundreds of times. Then Denise opened the cardboard box and began handing out the inserts one row at a time. Dad took the microphone at 10 in the morning. He welcomed the mayor, the foundation officer, veterans, families, and students. His voice was steady. He had spent years becoming the man people trusted at a podium. I stood near the front with the blue folder against my ribs. Luke waited on the opposite side of the platform. The folded flag remained in the preparation room. Dad spoke about sacrifice. He spoke about names and memory. He said the memorial proved that ordinary citizens could create something lasting when they placed service above personal recognition. I almost admired the precision of the insult. He was using the language of humility to defend a public act of erasure. Then he introduced Luke. "This project needed someone who could connect the past to the future," Dad said. "My son did that. He brought our community together. Today he will speak for the next generation." Applause rose politely. Luke took one step toward the microphone. Denise stood. "Frank," she said, loud enough to carry across the first rows. Dad kept his smile fixed. She held up the corrected insert. "The board approved Harper Cole as keynote. The vote was confirmed last night." A ripple moved through the crowd. Dad covered the microphone with one hand and told her to sit down. I walked onto the platform. Dad shifted in front of the podium. He whispered, "Do not do this." I set the altered program on the wooden surface between us. "You already did," I replied. Then I lifted the microphone from its stand before he could turn it off. My hands were cold, but they were not shaking. I looked at the families near the memorial wall, not at the cameras. "Good morning," I said. "My name is Harper Cole. I served 8 years in the Army. I was the Veteran Project Coordinator for this memorial." The sentence was factual. That was why it landed so hard. Dad reached for the program. I placed my palm over it. "This was the program approved by the committee," I continued. My name was printed as keynote speaker. Then a white label was placed over it without a vote. I caught the corner with my fingernail and slowly peeled the strip back. The paper made a soft tearing sound through the microphone. Under the label, my name appeared in black ink. People in the front rows leaned forward. The television camera turned from Dad to the program. I held it up long enough for the room to understand what they were seeing. Then I laid it flat again. Dad stepped beside me. "This is an internal scheduling matter," he said. His voice carried without the microphone because he had trained it too. "Harper agreed to a smaller ceremonial role. There has been a misunderstanding." I opened the blue folder and removed the email where I had stated the exact compromise. I agreed to 3 minutes if my name remained in the program as Veteran Project Coordinator, I said. I did not resign. I did not agree to ceremonial support only. The committee minutes show that. I placed the minutes beside the program. Dad looked down at the documents, then at Luke. Luke had stopped at the edge of the platform. Dad said, "Tell her what you understood." Every face turned toward my brother. Luke swallowed. "She agreed to shorten her speech," he said. Dad waited. Luke added, "She did not agree to disappear." The silence after that was different from the silence Dad usually controlled. It did not belong to him. He tried to recover. "This memorial is not about one person's credit," he said. I answered, "Exactly." That is why no family gets to replace the record with a more convenient son. A few people gasped. I had not planned that sentence. It came from 15 years of being placed in drawers, footnotes, and group thank yous. Dad's face went pale, then red. "Your brother raised more money than anyone here," he said. "He has earned the right to speak." I said Luke's fundraising mattered. I said the volunteers' labor mattered. I said Dad's years of organizing mattered. Then I opened the grant application to the signature page. My work matters too. This project received $180,000 through an application that required a veteran coordinator. Dad asked me to serve in that role and used my service statement. He also signed the application beside me. The foundation officer was seated near the aisle. I did not ask her to stand. I did not need an authority figure to rescue me. I simply stated what the record showed. My service was important when it qualified the project, I said. It became inconvenient when the microphone was turned on. Dad pointed toward the wall. "You are risking all of that over a speech," he said. His hand trembled. For the first time, I saw fear beneath his anger. He believed the memorial and his reputation were one structure. He included the family in that structure. If one piece moved without his approval, he thought the whole thing might fall. I looked at him and felt something softer than victory. I felt grief. "No," I said. "I am protecting that wall from the same kind of omission we built it to correct." I turned the program so he could see my uncovered name. "You taught me that a name is what outlives fear. Then you covered mine because you were afraid of what it said about you." Dad stared at the paper. The crowd disappeared from his expression. For a moment, we were back in our kitchen with my army paperwork between us. He said, quietly, "I was trying to keep the focus where people could accept it." The microphone caught every word. I asked, "Where could they accept it?" He did not answer. I asked again. Dad glanced toward Luke, then toward the television camera. "A father and son made sense," he said. The honesty arrived too late to protect him. It also explained everything. Luke closed his eyes. Mom sat in the front row with both hands pressed around her purse. Denise stood beside the steps. Nobody moved. Dad continued, as if confession could become justification if he finished the thought. "People understand a line from father to son. They understand legacy. I did not want opening day turned into an argument about who was excluded." I said, "You excluded me to avoid talking about exclusion." Dad's mouth opened, but no answer came. I had spent years preparing explanations for a man who always changed the standard. At the microphone, I finally understood that the truth did not require his agreement. I removed the corrected committee insert from my folder. "The board restored the approved program last night," I said. "The foundation has the accurate record. The television station received the correction this morning. I will give the keynote the committee approved. Afterward, the board can decide who should continue speaking for this memorial." That was the irreversible action. I had already sent the documents before Dad placed the flag in my arms. He could not end the correction by taking the microphone. The public record no longer depended on his willingness to tell the truth. Dad looked toward the committee members. 3 of them stood beside Denise. The donor who had abstained remained seated, but he nodded once. Dad's authority did not collapse with shouting. It simply stopped being supported. He stepped away from the podium. Luke moved toward him. Dad said, "You were supposed to give the speech." Luke answered, "It was never mine." He placed his prepared pages on a chair. That choice mattered, but it did not repair everything. He had known enough to correct the record months earlier. Still, for the first time, he refused to stand on top of my name. I faced the crowd again. The altered program lay open beneath my hands. I could have used the moment to list every private hurt. I did not. The memorial deserved more than our family argument. I took one breath and began the speech I had written before Dad decided truth was controversial. I told them about the old bronze plaque and the rain-soaked paper flag. I told them that someone had written a woman's name in blue ink because the official medal had no place for her. I said communities rarely announce that a person does not count. More often, they leave a blank, shorten a list, simplify a story, or promise to correct the record later. I asked June Parker to stand. She rose slowly in her red coat. I told the crowd she had served as an Army nurse and had waited decades to see her name recorded by her hometown. The applause that followed was not polite. It rose from veterans and students. It also came from families and people who had never known she served. June pressed one hand to her mouth. Dad looked at her. Then he looked at the wall where her name had been carved. I wondered whether he understood that his decision had placed me inside the same pattern he claimed to repair. Maybe he did. Understanding is not the same as taking responsibility. I spoke Alina Ruiz's name. I described her terrible coffee face and her quick hands. I also described the empty chair at morning briefings. I did not turn her into a symbol without a life. I said her family had given permission for her name to be included in our opening display. Her photograph stood beside the wall, laughing at something beyond the frame. Then I returned to the program. Accuracy is not vanity, I said. Credit is not the same as glory. A memorial fails when it uses someone's service but removes her voice, and it fails when a clean story matters more than a complete one. Today, we are not opening a monument to perfect families. We are opening a record of real people. The plaza stayed quiet. I could hear the flag rope striking the pole in the wind. Every name on this wall belongs in the open, I said. Not under a label, not inside a drawer, not reduced to support for somebody else's legacy. I looked at Dad only then. That includes mine. I closed the folder. The people honored here did not all look alike, serve alike, vote alike, or return home to the same welcome. What they share is that their service happened. Our comfort cannot edit that fact. Our families cannot edit it. Our pride cannot edit it. I thanked the researchers, donors, builders, volunteers, and families. I named Luke for his fundraising. I named Dad for organizing the first committee. I named Denise for protecting the record when the committee was tested. Giving them accurate credit did not weaken my case. It proved the difference between truth and retaliation. When I finished, there was a pause before the applause. I will always remember that pause. It was the sound of people deciding what they had witnessed. Then June began clapping. Others joined her. The applause moved across the plaza and became something larger than approval. It felt like a room making space where a name had been covered. Dad remained beside the platform. He did not clap. Mom did once, then stopped when she noticed him. Luke clapped with both hands and did not look away from me. I left the altered program on the podium while the mayor stepped forward to dedicate the wall. The color guard led the procession. I walked with the other veterans, empty-handed and fully visible. Nobody needed me to carry a ceremonial flag behind my brother. The base team carried the colors with the care they deserved. I stood beside June while the memorial covering was removed. The limestone wall appeared all at once. Names caught the morning light. Families moved forward slowly, searching. June found hers and touched each letter with 2 fingers. I found Alina's name on the later conflicts panel. The stone did not rank our stories. It did not call one legacy cleaner than another. It held the record and asked us to face it. The television reporter approached me after the ceremony. She asked whether the confrontation had been planned. I said the correction had been planned because the error had been deliberate. She asked whether I wanted to accuse my father of discrimination. I told her the documents and his own words were enough. I would not turn the memorial into a spectacle to make my pain easier to package. Then she asked what people watching should understand. I said, When someone uses your experience to gain access, then removes your name when credit becomes visible, that is not humility. It is erasure. The reporter nodded. She did not ask me to repeat it. The sentence aired that evening exactly once. Dad left before the reception. Mom followed him. Luke stayed near the wall, answering questions from volunteers. He corrected anyone who called him the founder. Each time, he said, Harper led the grant and research. I handled outreach. It was late, but it was accurate. I accepted the correction without pretending it erased the years before it. At the reception, Denise handed me a fresh program with the corrected insert secured inside. My name appeared where the committee had placed it. She asked what I wanted to do with the altered one. I peeled the white label the rest of the way off. But I did not throw it away. Keep both in the archive, she said. Future committees should know that records can be challenged before they become history. I liked that idea, but I was not ready to donate it yet. The program had been a public document and a private wound. I slipped it back into the blue folder. For the first time, the label was beside my name instead of over it. The committee met 3 days later. Dad attended in his navy blazer and sat at the head of the table as if the ceremony had been a temporary disturbance. Denise moved that he be removed as chair for ignoring 2 board votes and issuing false statements about another member. I seconded the motion. Dad looked at me. You want my seat too? He asked. I said no. I wanted the board to have a chair who followed its own decisions. The vote passed. Denise became interim chair. Dad remained a general member, but he lost authority over media, programs, and records. That was the visible consequence. He had used his position to make family preference look official, so he no longer controlled the official voice. I did not take the chair. I accepted a new role as archive director for 1 year, with responsibility for preserving source documents and correcting future errors. It fit the work I had already done. Dad walked out before the meeting ended. Luke followed him into the hallway, then returned alone. He resigned as community spokesperson. I need to stop being the answer to questions nobody asked me, he said. The line sounded rehearsed, but it was his. The board accepted his resignation and thanked him for the money he had raised. Mom called that night. She said Dad had given years to the memorial and I had humiliated him in front of the whole town. I asked whether she had seen the label. She said the label was unfortunate. I asked whether she had heard Dad say a father and son story made more sense. She told me he was from a different generation. I said he was not too old to use my grant statement. Mom went quiet. Then she asked whether I would come to Sunday dinner and help everyone move forward. I told her I would not sit at a table where moving forward meant leaving the truth outside. She began to cry. I cried after we hung up. A boundary can be necessary and still break your heart. For 2 weeks, Dad did not contact me. The town paper published a correction naming me as Veteran Project Coordinator and Keynote Speaker. The television station added my role to the online segment. Neither correction ruined the memorial. Donations continued. School tour filled the calendar. The disaster Dad predicted never arrived. What arrived instead was a letter in Dad's handwriting. It contained 4 paragraphs about stress, television pressure, donor expectations, and his desire to protect the project. The final sentence said, "I am sorry things became so public." He was apologizing for the location of the truth, not for the lie. I placed the letter beside the altered program and did not answer for 3 days. Then I wrote back. I will talk when you can say what you did without calling it pressure, simplification, or a misunderstanding. You covered my name, replaced me with Luke, and lied about my ability to speak. Until you can name those choices, we do not have a repair to discuss. Dad did not respond. That silence hurt, but it was clean. I was no longer spending energy translating half apologies into love. He knew the sentence required. Whether he could say it was his work, not mine. Luke came to my house a month later with the compass Dad had given him before he almost enlisted. He set it on my kitchen table. I told him I did not want it. He said he was not giving it to me. He was returning it to Dad, but he wanted me to understand why. He gave me a symbol before I earned anything, Luke said. Then he spent years making you earn what he still would not give you. I asked whether he understood his part. He said he had let Dad describe comfort as peace and delay as fairness. I kept thinking I could fix it later, he said. Later was always after you paid the cost. I did not forgive him in one conversation. I told him trust would return through repeated correction, not one accurate speech in my kitchen. He nodded. That was new. Luke had always tried to charm pain into becoming smaller. This time, he let it remain its real size. Over the next 6 months, he volunteered at the memorial without appearing in promotional photographs. He scanned family records and labeled boxes. He also called veterans whose names needed confirmation. When reporters contacted him, he directed them to the committee. Quiet work did not erase his earlier choices, but it was the first work he did without standing at the center of the picture. Dad did not return to the board. He attended one public event and stood at the back. We saw each other across the plaza. He lifted one hand. I nodded. That was all. Some people would call that sad. It was also honest. Reconciliation without accountability would have been another white label, smooth on top and false underneath. In the spring, I led a school tour through the memorial. The students gathered around the archive case where we displayed the first approved program, the corrected insert, and project photographs. The altered program was there too. I had finally donated it, with the white label preserved beside the keynote line. A girl near the front pointed to the label. "Why did someone cover your name?" she asked. Her teacher looked embarrassed. I told her the simple truth. Someone thought another person's name made a better story. The committee corrected it before that story became the official record. The girl studied the program. "Were you mad?" she asked. I smiled. "Yes." A few students laughed, but being angry was not the important part. The important part was using the records and telling the truth. I also had to refuse the role that required me to stay silent. After the tour, June Parker joined me by the wall. She wore the same red coat even though the day was warmer. She touched her name and said, "Looks like they finally learned how to leave the women in." I told her learning once did not guarantee remembering. That was why we kept the documents. Before I locked the archive case, I looked at the altered program one more time. My name was visible in black ink. The white strip rested beside it, no longer strong enough to hide anything. Dad had once told me a name was the part of a person that could outlive fear. He was right about that. He simply never expected me to protect my own. I turned off the case light and watched my reflection disappear from the glass while the program remained. My name was still there, exactly where I had earned it. The label was still there too, but it covered nothing. I had peeled it back, and I never pressed it down again.